All day long, the helicopters went to and from the American embassy, ferrying diplomatic staff, including the acting ambassador, to the airport, dropping flares to deter Taliban anti-aircraft fire. If you think that sounds like Saigon in 1975, you're not alone. A month ago, President Biden said it was highly unlikely that the Taliban would overrun everything and take the country. Today, he said nothing. The British 16th Air Assault Brigade arrived in Kabul to help evacuate British citizens. The ambassador has remained at the airport, apparently personally processing the visas of Afghan interpreters who will also be flown to the UK if they qualify. At the airport, thousands of desperate Afghans were trying to leave. Those who worked for the government or international organisations are terrified. Taliban officials drew crowds inside the city. Who knows if the people are motivated by genuine enthusiasm, curiosity, or fear of what will happen to them if they fail to support their new rulers. Kabul has been conquered, says the commander. Under the Sharia, your health and wealth are secure. When they ruled in the 1990s, the health of women and minorities, including the Shia Hazaras, was far from secure. Whatever they say, they believe in flogging, hand-cutting and the suppression of women. Their ideology has not changed. In the morning, President Ashraf Ghani addressed the nation, saying that the Afghan security forces should be responsible for people's safety. By the evening, all that remained was his image. He had fled to Tajikistan, to the derision of his deputy, who was left to negotiate surrender with the Taliban.
The former president left Afghanistan and the nation in its current state. He will have to answer to God. And the people of Afghanistan will also make their own judgment. I wish you all patience. May God help you all. And may these difficult days and nights soon be over.
People queued at the banks to withdraw their savings. Some because they hope to leave the country, others because who knows what will happen next, whether the Taliban will respect the banking system or any system. Still, survival means adapting.
Everyone is tired of war, explosions and suicide attacks. Now things have changed. God is merciful, and we hope an Islamic system will be established in the country and there will be peace and stability.
Politicians are adapting too. Humayun, once Deputy Parliamentary Speaker, said today that he's the new Taliban police chief. Discussions about switching sides must have been going on behind the scenes for months. In Kunar province, boys threw stones and shoes at Afghan troops who'd fled without offering any resistance to the Taliban. "You're cowards," they shouted. The Americans are also keen to blame the incompetence of the Afghan National Army and not their own perfidy.
The fact is, we invested, the international community invested over 20 years, billions of dollars in these forces, 300,000 of them, with an air force, something the Taliban didn't have, with the most modern, sophisticated equipment. And unfortunately, tragically, they have not been able to defend the country. And I think that explains why this has moved as quickly as it's moved.
Tonight, the Taliban declared that once again Afghanistan is an Islamic emirate. They're the power now, and Western governments have abandoned Afghans to their fate.
Lindsey Hilsum. Well, earlier today I spoke to Farzana Kochai, an Afghan MP who's chosen to remain in Kabul. I asked her what life's like in the city now.
After that, then I saw that there are some gunfire a little bit far from the center of the city, but in Kabul. And there was an announcement and a message that people were sharing that the Taliban will get to the Kabul city. And the people just got to their houses, and now the city is like a sleep city. You think that no one lives here, that millions of people who are living in Kabul just disappeared in between minutes or hours. it was so difficult time. It's so difficult yet.
Are you still an MP? Is there still a parliament?
Actually, I don't know, because the things just changed in hours. So some says that President Ghani is not in Kabul anymore. He has left it. Dr. Abdullah said that. And the government itself, I don't know, everything is left to the Taliban in provinces. And I don't know what the settlement, the political settlement is like. No one talks about that.
The Taliban say nobody in Kabul has anything to fear. Everybody will be safe. People must be calm. Everything will be okay. Do you believe them?
I can't believe them. No one can. For those who can do anything to make themselves safe and don't take the risk of these announcements, they are actually doing that. They are not taking risk. No one can take risk of life. Like, it's a big thing. It can't be handled once it comes. So no one can take that risk. I personally am confused here. When the Taliban came at first to the Kandahar and Takhar provinces, they did something that is anti everything. Like, it's not, we can't expect that as a human being, as an Afghan, as a Muslim. So we are still facing a confusion whether this is the reality of the Taliban that are now talking about, or that was the reality of the Taliban.
Will you try to leave the country, or will you stay? And if you stay, why?
For the time being, I'm staying in the country because, we can't leave the country, all of us. Like, this country needs us, and this is our country, and we need to be in our country in order to live a good life. So for sure, we have, everyone has got feeling for the country, especially when it needs you. And so you can't escape that easily. I will be here until I can do something as an Afghan to my country, to my people.
And we hope that yourself and your family and friends all remain safe. Thank you indeed.
Thank you.
Farzana Kochai speaking to me a little earlier. But I've also been speaking to the Afghan journalist Bilal Sawari, who's also in the Afghan capital, and I asked him whether he thought the Taliban this time around might be different.
Well, we will have to see, how the Taliban conduct themselves. They definitely say, their political leadership, that they're different, that they're offering an amnesty, and that things will be different this time around. The Taliban political leadership knows that they're fighters and commanders who are hot-headed, hot-blooded, more rigid, more extremist, could do things on the ground differently, as we have seen across the country, from brutality to harsh sentences, to the idea that they have in their minds that they can win everything militarily, which is actually, what has happened. They have got all of Afghanistan now. So we'll have to see how the Taliban emerge from that transition of fighting and then governing.
Right. Talks tomorrow, we are told, in Doha, between what remains of the government, if we can call it that, and the Taliban. What on earth do the Taliban have to talk about? They've got everything they want, haven't they?
I think it's about political settlement. It's about power sharing deal. This must have been the work of the Americans in the background, because the Taliban would know that if they want international legitimacy, if they want future funding, that's how it has to be. This would be the position of Taliban if they thought logically. And what I'm saying, let's wait and see. But for now, at least the people here in this city, in this country, have clarity, both from the Taliban and the Afghan government, confirming that President Ashraf Ghani has been sidelined, that there would be a transitional government which will focus on a ceasefire, which will focus on a road ahead for political settlement.
As we know, ISIS are in Afghanistan, Hizb Islamiyah are in Afghanistan, the Haqqani organization are in Afghanistan. All these organizations, terror organizations, are at large. There's the old warlords faction, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, the list goes on. The Taliban has very small control over these groups, does it not?
The Taliban are now in total control of the country. almost. They are also in control of ample amounts of weapons, ammunitions, aircraft, helicopters, airports. How they lead from here is a million-dollar question.
Meantime, two countries that we don't talk about enough, but we should in this: Pakistan, who made the Taliban, huge influence now in Afghanistan, and China, of course, who took no part in the invasion. The market's wide open for China.
Well, the regional dynamics have to be addressed here. Afghanistan's neighbors, have to play their own role in a future in this country that is about prosperity, that's about trade, because Afghanistan can serve as a land bridge between, Central Asia and South Asia, and there are a lot of opportunities. But we have to really wait and see what we are looking at, what type of international commitment there is. Will funding stop? Will the Taliban, for example, allow girls' education? These are all questions that I simply, would like to see the Taliban answer them practically rather than I can speculate about it. But there are fears, genuine fears and concerns about the Taliban. This is a group that was fighting for 20 years. So they are still a mystery in some ways to the people.
Bilal, thanks very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
Bilal Suari speaking to us earlier. Well, following an emergency meeting of the government's Cobra Committee, the Prime Minister said he would prioritise getting British nationals out, but also do what he could now to help the Afghan people.
It's clear that there is going to be, or there is going to be very shortly, a new government in Kabul, or a new political dispensation, however you want to put it. And I think it's very important that the West collectively should work together to get over to that new government, be it by the Taliban or anybody else, that nobody wants Afghanistan once again to be a breeding ground for terror. Of course, we continue to attach huge importance to human rights, to equalities. Think of everything that the UK has helped to achieve over the last 20 years, the sacrifice of that mission. A lot of women and girls were educated thanks to the efforts of the UK. Human rights, equalities were promoted and protected in a way that Afghanistan hadn't seen before. Of course, we don't want to see that thrown away.
So, Operation Enduring Freedom, the Americans called it, bombing the Taliban from power after the 9/11 attacks 20 years ago. Freedom there assuredly was for many Afghans, but security and genuine government control there was not. The long erosion of freedom then turbocharged to destruction the moment America signalled the date for military exit.
Appearances can deceive. The Taliban have not overthrown the secure government of a country. They've gradually eroded the Kabul administration year by year, which has controlled less and less of its territory. There has not been peace or stability. Grown and nurtured over the border in Pakistan, it was that country which allowed the Taliban phenomenon to sweep to power before being ousted 20 years ago. And Pakistan which has allowed the Talibs to regroup and return. The moment Americans set a date to pull out their troops, the Taliban's 20-year war was won. Denying Afghan troops air support removed the fundamental of all the training America had lavished upon them. That, along with the Taliban's strategy of paying government forces to surrender and go home unscathed, sealed the fate of the government the West has propped up for 2 decades. 20 years ago, US B-52 bombers carpet-bombed the Taliban out of the country. The mission? To remove al-Qaeda after the September the 11th attacks. Celebrations on the streets of Kabul.
Thanks to our military and our allies and the brave fighters of Afghanistan, the Taliban regime is coming to an end.
Elections would follow. Hamid Karzai would be president. A new parliament, women free not just to work, to vote, but to be MPs. None of that remotely possible during the Taliban years of absolute male dominance, women abolished in public life. At Then began the unceasing attacks across the country from the Taliban, who were down but never out. America finally simply could not, would not sustain the operation.
For many of you, this will be your last tour in Afghanistan. And by the end of this year, the transition will be complete, and Afghans will take full responsibility for their security, and our combat mission will be over. America's war in Afghanistan will come to a responsible end.
There was no responsible end, of course. So two great strands of Afghan opinion now. One we hear in the West, educated English-speaking urban Afghans lamenting the loss of human rights from the relatively secure cities if the Taliban come again. We almost never hear from rural Afghans, though, who will tell you the Taliban rooted out so much corruption and brought the stability the West never could. Perhaps it boils to one main question now, and only one group can answer it: the Taliban. What kind of Taliban 2 will it be? What strategic lessons have they learned, be it human rights or allowing their country to be a base for those who wish to attack the West? The Taliban always said they've got no problem with any foreign country. Their fatal error, though, last time around was to foster those who do. Have they changed?
So, what strategy can the international community now grasp from the wreckage of comprehensive defeat? I've been speaking to the former head of the British Army, Lord Richard Dannatt, and Hosna Jalil, who was an interior minister in the Afghan government. I asked her if there are any strategic choices now left.
I can't say it's too late for the, I would say for the big decision makers of war all over the world. I can't say it's too late for them, even now, to save Afghanistan and the rest of the world.
Even now?
They have, even now, because they have, I would say, I share the responsibility, and I personally hold myself and my government accountable for the miseries we go through, but I share it equally with the rest of the world, with our international allies. What I would say is that right now that we have handed over everything to the Taliban, we are on the way to promote a terrorist group to a terrorist state. We are handing over a nation to a terrorist group, which is going to be their strength. But at the same time, that terrorist group is not going to be a normal terrorist state. They do have access to modern Western-made equipments, women, ammunitions. But at the same time, they're going to have an air force. They have access to an aircraft.
Because you raise a huge issue
Right.
there. That's the point, isn't it, Richard? I mean, the West went into Afghanistan 20-odd years ago to get rid of al-Qaeda, essentially. It wasn't initially nation building. Here we are again, and as Hosna Jalil says, we are about to see, in her words, a terrorist government.
Yes, I think that is the stark reality of where we were. We're having to live with the consequence of bad choices in the last 20 years. Good choice to go into Afghanistan 2001, sweep out the Taliban, sweep out al-Qaeda, correct. But then being misguided enough to go into Iraq in 2003, not to involve ourselves in nation building in Afghanistan 2003, 4, 5, 6, that was a strategic error of biblical proportions. Now, that said, over the last 5, 10, 15 years, we've patiently built up the Afghan state, their government, their economic capability, and significantly their security forces. But once President Biden decided that he was going to leave by the date of 9/11, 20 years on, that sent a terrible message to the people of Afghanistan. We didn't have terribly many US and international troops in Afghanistan the last 4 or 5 years, but what they were doing was providing technical and moral support to the Afghan National Security Forces. And they were doing a good job containing the Taliban. As soon as the Americans and British decided to leave, and the others decided to leave, the technical capability was reduced, the morale of the Afghan National Forces has gone down, and we're living with the consequences. No strategic choices now, just an operational reality and a tactical embarrassment.
OK, tactical embarrassment, no strategic choices, but let me clutch at one possible straw of hope, perhaps, in this. Hosna Jalil, the Taliban need international recognition, and the Taliban government will need money. that's about all we've got to negotiate with. Is there any way the world can extract some kind of, how can I put it, more reasonable Taliban government in exchange for that recognition? Is there a chance?
The strategic choice we can have is this political pressure we can put on Taliban, at the same time on its allies, on its supporting states. And I have to be brutally honest here, we need to pressurize Taliban here, and they can play a wonderful role.
Do you see any chance, any sliver of hope there that there is something we can get leverage with there?
I think the problem the Taliban will have got, if, as looks pretty likely, they will have taken complete control of Afghanistan, is where do they go for support in the future? Okay, the last 24 hours, they've taken control of Jalalabad, so that's opened up the way to Pakistan, the Islamic State of Pakistan, an Islamist state quite clearly in Afghanistan, so maybe they've now got a good ally in Pakistan. But is that enough? Because Pakistan is not everyone's favorite country. Then you look the other way, you look to Iran. I don't think there are many common bedfellows between the Iranian Shia regime in Iran and what will likely to be in Kabul.
Sure. The key issue for Afghanistan after centuries, let's face it, of instability is security. There are many Afghans, Hosna Jalal, as you know well, who say, look, we might not like the Taliban, we not like what they do, but they brought security and they cut down the appalling corruption which is corroding this country. There's a degree of truth in that.
With the Taliban, the corruption is exactly the same case like we have with the narcotics issue. Taliban claims that there has been zero narcotics cultivation and transportation and smuggling during the Taliban regime, and now it has risen during the Republic government. But the thing is that the whole state had monopolized that business. Now, no one could figure that out. There was no freedom of speech. There was no media. There was literally nothing to figure that out, what's really happening inside that state. Their corruption business has been the same, like I would say their narcotics business. But at the same time, there's one more thing, that when we are talking about a well-established, bigger state which serves, the public I would say on a larger scale, that is more vulnerable to corruption compared to, I would say, a very small regime. We also need to compare that with the vulnerabilities. I don't ignore that we didn't have corruption. We did have it as a immature state of 20 years old.
Of course.
But at the same time, we did have, I would say, corrupt officials.
Right.
But I can't say that's comparable to Taliban, not at all.
Okay. Hosna Jalal, finally, I want to return to the point you made at the beginning of this discussion. You are totally convinced you cannot separate the Taliban from international terrorist groups, and that therefore what is happening now is taking us straight back to 2001 in terms of world security, right?
At least I've had 2 rounds of Taliban in just my 20s. And it's just my 20s, right? So what I would say is that for Afghanistan, we bear most of the costs, and we hold ourselves more responsible for what's happening in Afghanistan. Well, we might have, in the future, we might have another version of Emirates. It might be a little bit different than their previous version, but I would say more brutal than what it was.
Hosna, Richard, thank you both very much indeed for your perspectives.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you indeed.